Hello, everyone, and heartfelt welcome to Change Your Parenting Blueprint, a community masterclass dedicated to helping you transform negative cycles on your family line so your children don't inherit them. My name is Megan Barella, and I am your positive parenting and happy home guide today. The Change Your Parenting Blueprint goals is to create a community of parents supporting you and celebrating who you are. We want you to know that you are accepted for who you are as a parent and a person, including your real life challenges. We want to empower you to be trusting of your emotions and their expression, and to help you build your life foundation of security and trust from inside. Within that, we're here to help you bring positive change to your life from the inside out through positive brain change. Because we want to help you live, excuse the typo there, in positive relationship with yourself. You are here if you want to transform negative cycles in your family and raise children who thrive. Within that, you believe that your positive relationship with yourself is the foundation for your positive relationship with your children. And we're going to explain some of the brain science of why that is today. So, our goal is to help you develop this positive relationship with yourself from the inside out. And Change Your Parenting Blueprint is specifically designed for parents who, as children, you experienced negativity or trauma. Maybe your parents were mean, manipulative, or passive aggressive. Maybe you experienced corporal punishment or beatings. Maybe your parents or caregivers or family members were emotionally, mentally, physically, or sexually abusive. Maybe you experienced systemic racism. As a white lady, I'm not going to speak to that today, and I highly recommend that you check out conscious parenting experts, Parenting Decolonized, and Chrissy's Couch for more information. In addition, you may have experienced poverty, caregivers who struggled with mental health or addiction. Maybe there was oppression from religion in your family, or you experienced illness or injury as a child, or divorce, separation, loss, or death of a parent or caregiver. That is a long list of possible adverse experiences. And it's no wonder today that in my work with thousands of parents and early childhood educators over the last decade, that upwards of 90% of parents today, what I've found in my experience, have experienced some form of negativity or trauma in their childhood that negatively impacts their parenting. So I want you to begin to see that you are not the problem. Your children's behavior is not the problem. That stress, negativity, and trauma is the root of the problems. A lot of probably the problems, if you're here today, that you're working with in your family. Okay. So within that, we want to take all and honor the possibility of adverse childhood experiences that you may have had and work with the coping mechanisms that you developed as a child to survive and get through these negative experiences. Because coping mechanisms are designed to keep us safe. But as adults, the coping mechanisms that we may have formed as children often hold us back, limit our full potential, and may impede on becoming the parents we are here today. So, today, we're going to help you shift from coping mechanism to thriving patterns. So, you develop that positive relationship with yourself, you create emotional safety and positive emotional expression for yourself. You work towards what's called earned secure attachment and positive brain change, also known as neuroplasticity. We help you reclaim your strengths, stay connected to the human family. And while all that is very important, it's also important to honor that social inequities are at the root of many people's negative childhood experiences, trauma, and stress. And while that's beyond the scope of today's workshop, it's important that we honor the negative impact of societal inequities on families. Okay. A little bit about me if you're new to our community, heartfelt welcome. It's important to acknowledge the privileged perspective I teach from. I am a white, straight, cisgendered, able bodied person. I'm also the single mom to a 12-year-old son. I'm a certified positive discipline parent educator. And as I shared, the last decade, I've worked with thousands of early childhood educators and families in my community based pre COVID days, and now exclusively virtual programs. Before that, my experience was in teaching, and I have a 20-year background in education, working with kids from the preschool to the high school years. I also have a master's in conflict resolution, which focused on transforming conflict transformation within families. Within that, I'm thankful for the professional experiences that I've had. And really, what allows me to help empower and to serve families with compassion and empowerment is my firsthand experience with this content, and being a child abuse survivor and having my own experience with high stress parenting when my son was little. So, I know what it's like to grow up in a home with a mentally ill, abusive, drug addicted parent. And I also know how that stress can carry through the adult years. Even if the behaviors have stopped, a lot of the stress and the high emotions can remain. And when my son was little, we were, working on transforming cycles of poverty and third generation single mom and domestic violence. And there was a lot going on, a lot of stress that impeded my parenting. From that time of stress, that also re-triggered my childhood experiences, I developed a lot of the approaches and started researching a lot of the content that I'm going to share today. Okay, so from that place, this combination of my lived experiences and my professional background and learning so much from the children and parents and teachers that I've served, I'm here to help you create your happy home and raise kids who thrive. And that all begins with your positive relationship with yourself. Okay, so some community guidelines. Remember that we're all in this together as parents of the next generation, but with stress levels and intergenerational cycles of trauma and parenting in the pandemic, it's affected each of us differently. And for some people, it's more like a stream of stress. Other people, it's like a river. And other people, it's like a tornado. And remembering that stress is the number one obstacle to you being the parent that you are here to be. Within that, you're the expert, and I'm your number one support person. We want to create a parenting circle of trust and support during our time together that you extend. Well, first you offer to yourself, and then you extend to your children and your family. We want to affirm your inner wisdom, and then from that place of all your strengths, we want to increase your accessibility to parenting tools and support and restore your faith and hope in your parenting. Okay, so you're invited to get into a place of curiosity and compassion. So, coming today with an open heart to positive change and having lots of compassion for yourself like you would a dear friend. Curiosity and getting into a place of just wondering. I'm wondering what's going on here. I wonder what's at the root. I wonder how we could change and shift this. And just getting curious, that can loosen up a lot of the rigidity and even fears that we have about doing this work of changing your parenting blueprint. And just know that this really is a judgment-free zone. And if you're here in the live session, that everything you share is confidential. Okay, so I'd love for you to do some reflections. Share in the chat, what are the ages of your children? And then if you look at your current challenges right now, which one of them do you feel like is rooted in your childhood experiences? So, for example, you're having problems with your children with sibling fights or with bedtime or listening to you, or maybe power struggles or meltdowns. And you know that where you're stuck or where you're shutting down, where you're yelling, it's actually from a childhood experience. Okay, so think about that for a moment and make sure you have lots of compassion for yourself. Within that, let's also celebrate you because you're here today because you are doing things differently. So, how are you already changing the cycles for your children? And it could be that your children have a voice and you didn't as a child. You listen to your children. Your children are growing up in a home with physical and emotional safety, and you did not have that. You're doing a lot of amazing work already in changing negative patterns in your family. And then lastly, what do you hope to get out of this masterclass? Okay, we're going to dive right into the content now, and we'll dive into some foundational brain science concepts. Okay, so we think about all of us as just like these individual people, right? And maybe we're connected to the people we know, we're connected to our family, our children. But really, this concept of individualism that we see in American society and part of Western culture, it's really a fallacy, right? Because we are all connected, all of our brains, through something called the social brain and the human family. And what does that really mean? Well, the brain, each of our individual brains is actually a social organ. So all of our brains are connected in this one social brain. In that, you can think that there's like a golden thread weaving through all of our brains and weaving through the social brain. And that's called the social synapse. True scientific term here, that golden thread. That's the way I explain it. And that golden thread that connects us all. Well, what's our shared humanity? That we're all have gifts and strengths and purpose here to share. And that there is sadly struggle in life. There's challenges, there's stress, and there's trauma. And we all share, even though our lived experiences are different and we each have unique gifts and strengths, we all share those two components of life that get manifested direct or differently based on our lived experiences. Okay. Now, if you go back to like that social brain, all of our brains are connected to in this one master brain of the human family. We're also all regulating one another through that golden thread, through what's called sociostasis. Okay. And so in our community here, we want us to be regulating one another into the highest degrees possible, where we're regulating for healing and empowerment. Because what happens when we set that intention and we hold that vibration for one another? Well, one, we're able to support the upliftment of one another through our shared vision. And secondly, we're able to magnify and compound the healing and empowerment exponentially because we're all growing it together. So that's our goal in this community. Okay, within that, just know that Our brains can change throughout our entire lives. Nothing about ourselves is ever set in stone. And the way that our brains change is actually through positive relationship connection. And so, neuroplasticity is the brain science term. If you look it up in Wikipedia, neuroplasticity, also known as neural plasticity or brain plasticity, is the ability of neural networks in the brain to change through growth and reorganization. Okay, so we can always change our brain patterns. So we want to create here a community of parents to help you sustain positive change to your life from the inside out. There's a lot in our life on the outside, externally, that we cannot control. Okay, what we're focusing on, and that all of that external societal factors, systemic roots of inequalities and injustices are all part of people's parenting experiences. And for the scope of this work, we're focusing on this positive brain change that can happen within you. Okay, so within that, one of the things that most of us are changing, if you're here today, it is possible that you did not have what's known as security of attachment with your parents, in that you couldn't consistently depend on your parents to meet your physical and emotional needs. And again, all of our childhood experiences are unique. Okay, within that, the definition of earned secure attachment is individuals who may have had troubled relationships with their parents during their own childhood, but they have come to make sense of their childhood experiences and their impact on their development as adults. That integration, that coherency of our lived experiences creates earned secure attachment. Okay. Now, what exactly, for the context of the work that we do here, the way that we look at earned secure attachment is that you develop a positive relationship with yourself, even if you had a negative, challenging, toxic, or traumatic relationship with your parents, or you had negative, challenging, toxic, or traumatic experiences happen in your childhood that made you doubt yourself. Okay. Within that, it's that positive relationship with yourself after childhood adversity. And when we click that earned secure attachment into place, then that positive relationship with you automatically and naturally builds a positive relationship with your children. I often jokingly tell parents, don't worry about your kids, just focus on you. And while, one, that's not altogether possible or realistic, and it's not altogether true, the point is, when we can give ourselves what we didn't have as children, when that need is naturally met, it's on autopilot to be developed for our children. And that is the power of the work that we do together here in this community. Okay, so within that, well, why does that work, like that natural autopilot development? If we're in a place of positive relationship, that naturally builds a positive relationship that our children have with themselves. Well, why is that? Dr. Dan Siegel, the pioneer in the field of interpersonality, said children's brains are more like sponges, okay? And the way that I explain this is, if you picture this is your adult brain, fully formed by age 21 to 25, and can still change throughout the lifespan. This is your children's brains, right? They're literally just sponging and growing their brains off of yours. And this is some of the power and the responsibility of parents. Well, how does this happen? Human brains are born very underdeveloped compared to other mammals. Within that, it's caregiving It's the caregiving that we receive and we give to our children that builds and develops human brains. There's this whole nature versus nurture debate. It's another fallacy. It's totally false. This gentleman, Lev Vakowski, I don't know anything about it, about his work, but he was a child psychologist from the late 1800s. But he first coined this term, our nurturing is our nature. And brain science today, what is it, 200 years later, confirms this, or 150 years later. Okay. So, our children's brains, a lot of what is developing for them is experience dependent, like socio emotional learning. Okay. They need us to develop their self-regulation. And in fact, due to that sponge brain, I always joke and let parents know self-regulation for kids is not really a thing. I mean, it's our ultimate goal that by the time our children are young adults that they can self-regulate. But until then, especially with young children, it's co-regulation. Our children are regulating off of our brains, okay? Within that, 90 to 95% of children's brains are formed by age 5. And that's why early childhood is so important, and early childhood education, because if we can get that foundation in place in those first 5 years of life, then that child is on autopilot for a brain that's optimized for thriving for the rest of their lives. Okay. Now, for those of us who experience adversity in the first 5 years of our lives, for those of us who our children may have experienced some adversity or some suboptimal parenting, just know we can always change the patterns. Okay. Especially with our children, because their brains, even after age 5, they're still sponging off of us. And this is what's so amazing, is that when you lock in these positive parenting tools, when you have access to tools and support, when you have your needs met, and you have that positive relationship with yourself, then your kids again are just really sponging off of that, and it's autopilot developing for them. Okay, so within that, in our community, we want to support you in having a positive relationship with yourself, even if you didn't have a positive relationship of trust with your own parents. Because again, when you lock that positive relationship in with yourself, then you're developing that positive relationship that your child has with themselves, right? That secure attachment because of that sponge brain. Okay. Let's go ahead now and talk about safety. Okay. Safety, really, this is the number one responsibility of parents, is to keep children safe, both emotionally and physically. And safety is defined as the condition of being protected from or unlikely to cause danger, risk, or injury. Really, this is the primary responsibility of parents. It says a lot about the state of humanity, our thriving as a people, that most of us didn't have our basic emotional and physical safety needs met from our own parents and caregivers. In fact, in the families that I work with, I would say even in loving homes that were otherwise safe and nurturing and trusting, very few parents today say their own parents knew how to meet their emotional needs and to support healthy emotional development and expression. So most of us have arrested development around emotional expression, and why our children today, who are no longer ruled by fear, are prone to high emotions, right? To meltdowns, to these big power struggles and explosions, because they're helping us get our positive emotional development in place so we can help support them. Okay, so safety. Emotional and physical safety is the building block for a child's lifetime of thriving health and happiness from the inside out. Forget about the summer camps and the enrichment and the virtual this and that and these experiences. Do your children feel physically and emotionally safe with you? Let's really focus on that, getting back to basics. And from that place of safety, then all the enrichment and all the thriving happens from that fundamental building block. Okay. So, what happens for most of us as parents today? So, in our own childhood, we might not have had that foundation of emotional and physical safety. So, we literally have these building blocks that are supposed to be there that the higher aspects of our life are thriving, are built upon our life today, our work, our parenting, our relationships, our stress levels, our ability to enjoy our lives. We're trying to place them when we still don't have that building block of felt safety within ourselves in place. And that's why so many people today have really beautiful lives where they're not enjoying. Something feels like it's missing because there is something missing, right? So in this work together, we get this your foundation of safety and positive relationship with yourself finally in place, and then you and your children thrive. Okay? So we create a community that helps you build your foundation of inner security, trust, and acceptance, also known as safety. Okay, let's specifically talk about emotional safety. So I don't know about Plutchik, but I really liked this wheel of emotions. I thought it was so pretty, and I love that the way they broke down the categories. Okay, our goal in part of developing a positive relationship with ourselves is to let ourselves know that all emotions are safe, acceptable, and okay to feel. Whether they are positive emotions or negative emotions, it is okay to feel, and it's safe to feel the full gamut of emotions. Okay. So, what happens for most of us, though, is not all the emotions were accepted and supported for you to feel when you were a child. Sometimes parents will say the positive emotions were safe to feel, like joy and happiness, but anger in particular, or sadness and crying, were not acceptable to feel. Others of us may feel like even the positive emotions weren't safe to feel because maybe there was something going on in the house that kind of squashed your joy all the time. So you may have developed a pattern of thinking that it's actually not safe for me to be happy. Okay. Now, some of us, in addition or instead of having emotions that were not accepted to feel as children, we might also have emotions that are actually connected to negative childhood experiences. So, for example, while anger and fear and grief are part of the emotional gamut that we want to accept, some of us may have childhood experiences and memories that were traumatic, where maybe we were in a fear state. And so we learned that those emotions, when they're connected to everyday experiences, that it's not safe to feel them, that it's never safe to feel anger or afraid or grief. Okay. So please just honor the rich emotional landscape that is within you and have compassion for yourself. Okay. And so within that, yep, just doing the reflections on the emotions, which were accepted and supported and which are connected to negative childhood experiences. What can happen is for in supporting our children. Well, if we have an unintegrated emotion or an emotion that we don't know how to feel, what happens is our children are either demonstrating behavior that triggers that emotion within us, or our children themselves are experiencing that unintegrated emotion. And with either of those scenarios, that's when we can send the message to our kids that it is not safe to feel or be angry and to feel grief or to feel overwhelmed. Okay. So we are here to help support you to really trust your emotions and to feel safe expressing your feelings. And from that and the sponge brain, then your children learn the same through your modeling. Okay, we also want to create a community where we can care for and heal emotional wounds like we do our physical wounds. If you think about it, what if, say, I had broke an arm or I had a festering wound on my arm? Well, what would happen if I went out in the world? This is really like a pre-COVID thing, but still now, people would hold the door for me. They might, give me a compassionate look. They might ask if I needed extra assistance. And hopefully, people would be extra supportive to help us and let us know that they see us with our physical wounds. It's very different with emotional wounds because we can carry them without anyone else knowing about them. And unless we feel secure enough to speak up and that we'll be loved and accepted and unconditionally supportive, we may carry these emotional wounds and burdens with shame, right? With guilt, with overwhelm. So we want to start thinking about how can we care for the emotional wounds? And in that way, you may have an emotional wound right now that is festering in your life. It's like an open wound. We want to help it heal, right? And then what happens? Like there's a scab that forms, and then the scab falls off, and then you just have a scar. And then we want to support you in taking that scar if you want to, and like turning it into some artwork, turning it into a tattoo, okay? So we want to help you heal your emotional wounds just like physical wounds heal. Okay. And why is that so important? Well, emotions are the safeguards of our life. And so emotions tell us if we're safe or not. And so our goal, again, is to model for our children that all emotions are safe. All emotions are safe to feel. Otherwise, we can live our lives and our family lives on red alert all the time. It's like there's sirens going on and ambulances all the time in our home environment when our emotions are on that red alert. Okay. So, our goal within that, all emotions are okay and safe to feel. So, what does that look like? Okay. That looks like being with. We're able to be with ourselves in positive relations to support all our emotional experiences. Within that, we're emotionally available to ourselves and we create a foundation of emotional safety for ourselves. That cultivates and grows our emotional intelligence and that security of attachment, that earned secure attachment. Okay. When we can do that for ourselves, then we offer that same process to our children. So they grow up with what's called security of attachment, that they believe they can trust and depend on and support themselves because we've supported them, we've protected them, and kept them safe, both physically and emotionally. Okay? This work of being with is from the circle of security, which is driven by decades of attachment research. I recommend going ahead and Googling those videos. They're about 4 minutes each, and they talk about some base in the circle of security that's black and white, some basic attachment fundamentals. And then the one on the right is called shark music. And that talks about our parenting triggers to our children's emotions. These are some really life-changing videos, okay? What exactly is the shark music? So what happens with shark music is our children express emotions that make us uncomfortable. And when that happens and we feel like, oh, this isn't safe to feel this is stressing me out, we either pull away, emotionally abandon our children, or we overrule and maybe punish them for feeling. Either way, they're left on their own, learning these emotions are not safe to feel. But why? Why do we do this? It's not like when our kids are angry, we set off, oh, I'm going to have this emotional response to my children's anger. No, we do this because our children's feelings in that parenting blueprint trigger strong emotions in us. And why? Why is that triggering happening? It's because the way core people in our childhood responded to our own emotions creates the background music for the way we experience our children's feelings. If you go ahead and go watch that video, which is the one that's the colored right here with the bright colors, then you'll understand this concept and why they call it shark music. Is those of you who've seen the movie Jaws, dun, dun, a lot of us have that sense of doom around certain emotions that our children have because of the way our parents or caregivers responded to that same emotion in us. Okay. So within that, we want to create this community of parents where we learn to trust our emotions, that we can develop within ourselves that all emotions are safe to feel. And then our children trust their emotions and they feel safe to express positively the full gamut of human emotions without getting stuck. Okay. So, within that, when we talk about our emotions, there's something very important to know is that our physical body, so our heart rate, our breathing, and our yelling or our shutting down or maybe rough responses with our children, all of those body functions are in a circular relationship of constant communication with our emotions and memories. Okay. So that's why, and they're communicating more directly and concurrently than the logical thinking brain. It's important to know that because we may have these knee jerk responses. We may feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a bad parent for responding this way. It's like, no, it's a physiological response that we just learn how to work with. Okay. And this really has to do with brain in the palm of your hand. Again, Dr. Dan Siegel, and that link in the bottom in pink has a 2-minute video on brain in the palm of your hand. But it talks about the brainstem, which is right here in your brain, in the back of your skull, responsible for things you don't have to think about, like heart rate and breathing, and also that stress response system in the face of perceived stress or danger. Fight, flight, or freeze are the options that we have. Now, moving upward would be the thumb, and that's the limbic system of memories and emotions. Okay. And remember, that brainstem and limbic system, they're just communicating all the time. And then over those subcortical regions, and this part right here, which is right here in our brain, is the prefrontal cortex. And it's responsible for our ability to be logical and problem solve and have empathy and compassion and access our language in a way that's helpful. Okay. So what happens is we've got these memories, even if they're unconscious memories, of the way our caregivers responded to our emotions. We're hungry, we're, financially or relationship stressed, we're parenting in the pandemic. Our kids demonstrate those emotions or activate those emotions within us. And we literally flip our lid. We lose access to our ability to be logical and compassionate. And then what's running the show is our emotions, and those old memories are activating the stress response system. And we may hold our breath, right? Our heart may start beating fast, right? And then we have that response, that flipped lid response, we call it. Okay. So again, I want you to know it's not a character flaw, right? It's not your fault. You're not the only one who experiences this. It's a physiological response because the body and the emotions have such a circular relationship that will knock that thinking, logical, and compassionate brain offline even before that logic, that prefrontal cortex has time to engage and say, hey, it's fine. Your kid's just crying. They're just angry. They didn't sleep. They didn't eat. You're safe. It's all going to be okay. Let me step outside. No, none of that reason or that empathy has time to kick online. Okay. So that's not you. That's a physiological response. So when we're talking about that stress response system in the brainstem, of fight, flight, or freeze. Within that, here's the thing about fight, flight, or freeze in that stress response system. Guess what? They're coping mechanisms. Fight, flight, and freeze are the body's line of defense to try and keep us safe in the threat of perceived danger. If you see that eagle in that picture, what is that eagle trying to do with its talons? It's trying to catch some fish. So this stress response system is an old adage from the time when we were living closer to wild animals, when there was a prey predator relationship going on, and we had to make sure that we were prepared to either fight back a wild animal, to run away from it, or if that didn't work, to try and play dead. Okay, so these are very, very old and ancient coping mechanisms. Now, today, most of us don't have wild animals attacking to us, but we have in the pandemic the highest stress levels of our lifetime to be a parent. And what's important to know there is our brains read stress and fear as one and the same. So when you have so many stressors going on and your child uses that tone of voice, or they start hitting each other, or your child engages and you engage in a power struggle, or there's a meltdown, you can literally interact with your child like they are a wild animal attacking you. Okay. Again, so important to know this, that it's an autopilot response. It's a physiological response. And within that, when you know this, then you can stop beating yourself up for your stress response tendencies and your coping mechanisms. And then we're going to talk about in a moment how we're going to shift and translate them. Okay, so some of us are fiery, passionate types. We're the yellers, we threaten, we punish in anger. We may be prone to anger, anxiety with our kids, hitting, kicking, biting, punching, crying with a temper tantrum. Those are, and there may be other behaviors, right? And sometimes there's crossover between the different stress response and coping mechanisms, okay? Then there's our peacemakers and conflict avoiders that may identify with a flight response, withdrawing, avoiding, kind of running away, going to hide in the bathroom, scrolling, giving into our kids because we just don't want the conflict, right? We don't want the drama. Just go ahead and have a little more screen time. In children, we can see, in addition to those behaviors, restlessness or fidgeting, especially when children, like when they're back in school, or crying with a meltdown. Okay. The freeze response can happen when stress levels are really high and with pandemic parenting. And for those of us who are trauma survivors, we also may be prone to a freeze response. That's when we feel like life just shuts us down. It's way too overwhelming. We may experience numbness. I'm sorry. That's some of the ones from the flight response. No response at all, depression, or just feeling like I can't get out of bed. Okay. So for all of us, most people, I would say, have a combination of stress response tendencies. Some parents just identify with one. And for some of us, different interactions, different stress factors, different people may bring out a different stress response tendency. We are complex. This is talking about our emotional landscape. There is no like check this box or check that box. There's a lot of overlapping areas that make us all unique. Okay, so within that, when we look at this right here, these behaviors, right? Most of us are trying to get away from those behaviors. We may have guilt or shame. We have may anger or resentment if our kids or our mate are demonstrating any of these behaviors, right? So most of us are like, we're either trying to just get away or repress or feel like these behaviors are haunting us, right? What we want to do, and this is where you can kind of get curious and be gentle with yourself, we want to translate that coping mechanism to thriving patterns so we can kind of melt some of the frozenness around your coping mechanisms of fight, flight, or freeze. And so you can really blossom and thrive. So, what some of the work that I help you do is take your natural coping mechanism and then translate it into a thriving pattern, okay? For fight response, that's usually doing something physical that your body allows and moving through the high emotion because yelling, it's something physical, it's a coping mechanism to stress. So we want to just translate and replace that, okay? So your needs being met for emotional expression and integration, but in a positive way. That flight response, we help you create space to integrate and then to reintegrate. This can be really challenging, flight response parents, if you have young children, right? They want to be with you because they need that co-regulation. And you're like, I just need a minute to myself. Okay. We help you develop plans if you, whatever your stress response tendency is. And then with a freeze response, we really want to attune to ourselves, attune to our children, and have an action plan in place so we can kind of come back to life, because that freeze response is that old adage, is that play dead, right? And just hope that the danger or threat's going to go away. So within that, start thinking about how you can take your coping mechanism and your stress response tendency and then meet the need for positive emotional expression and integration. Okay. Within that, we are also looking at to support our families thriving and to support our inner thriving, this balance between restore and release. Okay. All of us have needs for restore and release. The restore part is connected to the parasympathetic nervous system responsible for rest and digest. And that's exactly it. Like restore, what is that? It's rest, it's recharging, it's rejuvenating, it's relaxing. Okay. When that need for deep restoration isn't met, when there's arrested development around it, when we're highly stressed, when we're re traumatized in our life, then that can actually manifest in depression. Now, the other part is release of positive emotional development and changing your parenting blueprint. And with that release, that's the expression, that's the integration of our emotions. And that happens through right brain somatic activities. So the right brain is relational, right? And it's not verbal, and it is body centered, which is what somatic means. So for that, it's the arts, really. It's music and art and dance and movement as your body allows, and time in nature and yoga. Now, when we don't have this basic human need for emotional expression, for release, for integration met, then it gets pent up, right? And that can look like anxiety. Okay, or it is anxiety, right? And I also want to say, when we're looking at this, I don't want to minimize the need for that you may have for plant-based medicine, for pharmaceuticals, for other therapies to support you. It's not saying I'm going to listen to music and all my anxiety is going to go away, right? But there is a specific way in this work where we help you get your healthy emotional expression plan in place that is part of your healing and part of your family's thriving. Okay, so then though this right here, it does not involve the logical parts of the brain, right? This is really your feeling place and your the place of your body, right? Because It's that circular relationship from the emotions and the bodies that are our bodies that are guiding so much of our lives. So then when do we bring the cortical regions, right? The thinking, the logical, the empathetic, compassionate parts of our brain in? Well, the first thing that we help you do is let go of shoulds, mom guilt, shame, overwhelm around your current coping mechanism, because that coping mechanism is just here to help keep you safe. In addition, there is an amazing process where we look at your coping mechanism, and in that, it's kind of like in a ball of yarn or seaweed, there's this golden jewel. So it's like your coping mechanism is around your golden jewel, right? Because there's been stress or trauma. So we help unfurl that, because guess what's hiding in your coping mechanism? It's your strengths. It's your gifts in life. It's your purpose. And that's the beautiful part of what we do together to help you create your good life, even if you had adversity in your childhood. Okay. Within that, we also use your thinking and logical, compassionate, empathetic part of your brain to help you make your thriving plan. Okay. This is all about having a plan in place for positive emotional expression and integration, and to know how to break that plan into smaller steps to set you up for success. And then you practice your plan in calm and connected moments. So there is a fallacy out there that when our children are in these, when they're triggered, when they're upset, when their lids flipped, that we're going to somehow be brilliant. It's not possible. During the times of high stress, our number one focus is that emotional safety, expression, and integration. Okay. Then from that place, we do the teaching, the disciplining in calm and connected moments, and you make and practice your plan in calm and connected moments, rather, again, expecting that you're going to be brilliant when you're under stress, okay? Because you don't even have access to your logical, compassionate part of your brain. Within that, we want you to embrace that this is a lifelong journey and practice. And from that commitment to this practice, that you create your positive parenting blueprint for the next generations. Okay. Within that, some of the gifts from the challenges as well are that you come into a place of wisdom and service that you first give back to yourself and that you share with your community. Okay. So let's go ahead and work with this a little bit. So we have, where did our coping mechanisms, what would be like a process that we could actually break them down? So you have negative childhood experiences or trauma, and then a natural emotional response, and then you form a memory. Okay. With that association of that experience, your brain categorizes it as not safe or insecure. And from that, because there's unresolved emotions and experiences and real harm that may have happened, of course, in times of stress or when our children reactivate that type of experience, we're going to have a negative behavior response to them, right? That's only natural that anyone, if you're flipping your lid with your kids, would have that response based on what you've experienced, okay? And we want to help you shift out of that, okay? Because your negative behavior response based on insecurity and not feeling safe and negative memories and emotions, that actually solidifies your children's negative behavior and can actually develop negative character traits in your children and can ultimately lead to our children's insecure attachment. Okay. So within that, compassion is the key to your transformation. And then when we get that in place, empowerment is the next step. It's really your empowerment to have access to the tools and support to do things differently that creates positive change. Okay. So, what does this look like? Similar process, right? But from a strength based, thriving pattern perspective. You still have the negative experiences or life events from your childhood, right? We can't change the past, but we honor the negative emotions and memories and the coping mechanism that you may have developed to get through that time. In my work, I'm not a therapist, so we do not dive into the past. And I tend to work with families who have access to other therapeutic modalities, yet They're still not noticing change with their own children. And that's where I come in and where our community comes in, because we help you meet your own need that was unmet from childhood. We help you kind of detangle that coping mechanism so you access your strength and you learn how to give your strength back to yourself. From this, you create your thriving pattern of positive emotional expression. You create a trusting relationship with yourself. You're actually developing your positive character and life skills, because we're always growing and evolving, even as adults. And we know that our children are some of our best teachers. Okay. So, from all that inner work, you develop your children's secure attachment and you change your parenting blueprint. Okay. Now, we often think, and we're taught that like either the brain is in a place of surviving or thriving. And while that is true, it's also true that for many of us, we're on a bridge. Okay. So we've got this lane right here, or this side of the river, this pathway where those negative, those unresolved experiences are still ruling our lives when we're stressed, when we still have coping mechanisms, when we don't feel safe with our own emotions and our own emotional expression. We don't even know what to do. And then we're responding negatively to our children. And we find that those stress response tendencies of fight, flight, or freeze are running the show a lot. We have this surviving place, and then we have this thriving place, which was the other side, right, of where we want to get to, of the earned secure attachment, of the positive relationship with ourselves, the positive emotional expression, embodying our strength, modeling that so our children can sponge off of that, right? It definitely is two different pathways, but here's the thing. It's not either or. You are wherever you are in this moment, and we just work from that place. And then we help you create that bridge. Like you see that red bridge in the image, okay? We help you through accessing your own strengths and your inner wisdom. We help you create that bridge to go from surviving to thriving. We help you carve out to go from that pathway in the woods, from your surviving road. We carve out that pathway to go to your thriving road and help you embrace your journey of learning and growth. So, within all that, I invite all of you to schedule a 30-minute coaching session with me so I can offer individualized support with the Change Your Parenting Blueprint tools. At the very end of your coaching session, I will share some invites if you want to continue this journey together in community. Our goals in doing this work together of changing your parenting blueprint are to take those like little ghosts that may be haunting us and running the show that aren't even ours. They were just on our family line. And we see them and we wave them goodbye, right? And we help you live your good life. Help you have peace and that acceptance and closure to the past so you can embrace your strengths, and get your strengths back that actually may have been stolen from you in childhood. It's time to get those strengths back, right? And within that, to create that earned secure attachment, that positive relationship with yourself. And within that, that creates the security of attachment with your children. You change your parenting blueprint, you heal your family line, right? You create this foundation of emotional safety for yourself and your children. And then you're building a positive legacy for your children of a positive parenting blueprint. And once we have that locked down, right? Once we've built that for your family, it, there, it's there. It's there. And it goes on autopilot to be passed on as a positive legacy to all future generations of children in your family. So please, if you feel called to this work, to schedule a 30-minute coaching session with me so we can dive into the Change Your Parenting Blueprint tools and approaches and offer you individualized support, and also share a few ways for you to continue your journey, because the time is now. We want to interrupt those negative patterns that may be forming in your family that are totally possible for you to change. I look forward to seeing you again soon, and many of you in your coaching session. Be well. We are sending a well of unconditional support to you and your children. We believe in you. Be well, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.